Marcus Wright adjusted his cufflinks as he pushed open the heavy glass doors of Westfield Bank, the kind of institution that prided itself on serving only the most elite. The marble floor reflected the chandeliers above, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne. To most, it was a place designed to intimidate, but Marcus felt nothing but calm assurance as he walked across the lobby. His suit was sharp, his stride confident, but the moment he approached the front desk, the receptionist's smile faltered. She looked him up and down with a quick, dismissive glance, as though he didn't belong in the pristine space. "Yes?" she asked curtly, her voice carrying the kind of politeness reserved for those she had already decided were not worth her time. Marcus introduced himself and requested a meeting with the branch manager. Instead of responding with the courtesy owed to any client, she leaned slightly back, as if his presence required justification. After an awkward pause, she finally gestured toward the elevator's muttering second floor. He thanked her calmly, ignoring the snide look she exchanged with a colleague as he walked away. The whispers followed him, a murmur of curiosity and mockery that wasn't new to him. He had grown used to such treatment, though it never failed to remind him of how invisible people believed him to be until they learned otherwise. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped into the hushed environment of the executive floor. Plush carpets muffled his footsteps, and framed awards lined the corridor, flaunting the bank's achievements. Marcus found the office he was looking for and knocked. Inside, Patricia Harding, the branch manager, was seated behind a massive oak desk, her posture crisp and authoritative. She was in her late 40s, her tailored suit sharp, her demeanor colder than the polished steel pen she tapped against her notebook. When she looked up and saw him standing there, her brows furrowed slightly, though she quickly masked it with a tight-lipped smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped, as if she doubted he had business worth discussing. Marcus introduced himself again, mentioning that he was here to finalize a corporate transaction. Patricia tilted her head and chuckled lightly, a sound laced with disbelief. Her eyes flicked over him with a scrutiny that made her bias unmistakable. "I see," she said slowly, then leaned back in her chair as though entertaining a minor interruption. "And what kind of transaction did you have in mind?" Marcus explained, his voice steady, outlining the size and significance of the deal. Yet Patricia's smirk deepened. "We don't usually deal with individuals without proper introductions," she said, her words drenched in condescension. The way she emphasized individuals was sharp enough to cut, and Marcus recognized it instantly. The dismissal that came not from his credentials, but from the color of his skin and the assumptions tied to it. He remained silent for a moment, watching her with calm, unshaken eyes, then asked softly, "Are you sure that's the answer you want to give?" Patricia folded her arms, amused by what she took as audacity. "Absolutely," she replied, signaling the conversation was over. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he sat a little straighter in his chair, his composure unshaken, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had seen this act before countless times, and he knew what always came next. Patricia leaned forward in her chair, resting her elbows on the polished oak surface, as if she were about to deliver some confidential advice, though her tone carried the smugness of someone convinced of their own superiority. "Mr. Wright," she began, stressing his name as though it were almost an inconvenience to say, "this bank has a certain caliber of clients. We don't waste time with small accounts or people who can't meet our minimum standards. You might find it easier to try a smaller community branch, somewhere less demanding." She gave him a smile that wasn't a smile at all, more a smirk of dismissal, as if she were indulging a child who had wandered into the wrong room. Marcus let the words hang in the air, his expression calm, but beneath his stillness, his mind measured every detail. Her tone, her posture, the arrogance in her eyes. He didn't respond immediately, instead taking his time to open his sleek leather folder, the one he had carried specifically for this meeting. The folder contained the financial records, corporate agreements, and proof of assets that could not only validate his business, but dwarf the worth of most of the bank's existing clients combined. He slid the documents toward her with measured precision, but Patricia didn't even lower her gaze. She waved her manicured hand with a dismissive flick, her red nails catching the light. "These things can be faked," she said flatly. "I've seen people walk in here with all sorts of fabricated paperwork, thinking they could trick me into wasting my time. I don't appreciate being hustled." The insult struck with the weight of familiarity, yet Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he clasped his hands together and studied her, his silence unnerving enough that Patricia shifted in her seat. But she quickly recovered, leaning back with a self-satisfied smirk. "I'll have my assistant escort you out," she added, pressing a button on her desk phone. A soft buzz signaled her assistant's approach, and Patricia leaned sideways, whispering into the receiver just loud enough for Marcus to hear, "Some people just don't know their place." The words were not meant to be subtle. They were meant to sting, to reduce him to the stereotype she had already formed in her mind. Moments later, the door opened, and her assistant entered, his eyes darting between Patricia's smug face and Marcus's unreadable expression. The assistant hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He had seen enough powerful clients pass through the bank to recognize when someone wasn't ordinary. But Patricia gave him a sharp nod, signaling him to do as told. Marcus finally stood, his movements slow, deliberate, his eyes never leaving Patricia's. He adjusted his suit jacket, his voice low but steady as he asked, "Are you certain this is the decision you want to stand by?" Patricia arched a brow, her confidence unshaken. "Absolutely," she replied, as though she had just put an end to a trivial nuisance. Marcus's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile not of defeat, but of quiet certainty. He gathered his folder, tucked it back into his briefcase, and walked toward the door, the assistant stepping aside nervously as he passed. Patricia didn't notice the subtle tremor in her assistant's hands or the flicker of doubt in his eyes. She was too busy congratulating herself on maintaining standards. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't even imagine, was that the man she had just dismissed would soon shake the very foundation of her career, her reputation, and her entire bank. For Marcus, Wright was not the desperate client she thought him to be. He was the storm she had just invited upon herself. Marcus paused just before reaching the door, his briefcase in one hand, his composure still intact, but his patience worn to its edge. The assistant shifted, nervously, glancing between Marcus and Patricia as if sensing that something about this encounter wasn't what it appeared. Patricia, meanwhile, leaned back in her chair, her smirk deepening, convinced she had successfully brushed off yet another unqualified client. But Marcus, instead of walking out, turned calmly and reached into his wallet. From it, he withdrew a sleek, black identification card edged with gold, its surface embedded with holographic seals that shimmered under the office lights. Without a word, he extended it toward the assistant. The man hesitated before taking it, his eyes dropping to the name inscribed on the front. The moment he registered what he was holding, his breath caught, his grip faltered, and he nearly dropped the card altogether. His face drained of color, his eyes darting to Marcus with a look that mixed awe with disbelief. Patricia frowned, irritated by the assistant's reaction. "What is it now?" she snapped, snatching the card from his trembling hands. But as her gaze fell upon the ID, her voice caught in her throat. The holographic seal across the top displayed the unmistakable emblem of Wright Global Industries, one of the world's leading conglomerates, and beneath it in bold letters was the title, Chief Executive Officer, Marcus D. Wright. The gold insignia shimmered as the card tilted, glowing with an authenticity that could never be faked. Patricia's lips parted in shock, her smirk wiped clean in an instant. You're the Marcus Wright?" she stammered, her voice suddenly fragile. Her hand trembled as she tried to steady the card, the weight of her arrogance crashing down all at once. Marcus extended his hand, reclaiming the ID with deliberate calm. "That's the problem," he said softly, his eyes steady on hers. "You never cared to realize who was sitting in front of you." The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the quiet hum of the air conditioner and the faint shuffle of the assistant, who now stood rigidly at attention, his earlier hesitation replaced by a newfound respect. Patricia's mind raced, replaying every word, every dismissive gesture, every insult she had hurled his way. She had mocked him, dismissed his documents, even whispered that he didn't know his place, and now, standing before her, was a man whose name carried more financial power than her entire branch combined. Her carefully constructed facade cracked, panic seeping into her eyes. She tried to recover, forcing a shaky smile, but her voice betrayed her. I? I didn't realize, she began, her words tripping over themselves, desperate to crawl back from the pit she had dug. Marcus, however, was unmoved. His expression was cool, unreadable, his voice low but resonant with authority. You didn't realize because you didn't bother to look. Because people like me, in your mind, aren't supposed to sit at this table. He slipped the card back into his wallet, his movements measured, final. Patricia swallowed hard, her confidence shattered, her authority stripped away in an instant. She was no longer the gatekeeper of the bank, sitting high behind her oak desk. She was a woman exposed, her prejudice laid bare before the very man she had tried to diminish. Marcus straightened, his presence filling the room with an energy she could no longer control. The balance of power had shifted, and Patricia Harding knew it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't yet fathom, was just how devastating the consequences of her arrogance would soon become. Patricia's world seemed to tilt on its axis as Marcus stood silently across from her desk, his calm eyes holding her in place like an immovable weight she could no longer ignore. The smug confidence that had fueled her minutes earlier had drained from her face, leaving behind the pale, trembling features of someone who realized too late the gravity of their mistake. She fumbled with her words, her lips parting to offer apologies, to backtrack, to salvage what she could, but Marcus raised a hand ever so slightly, and she fell silent as if commanded. "Tell me, Miss Harding," he said slowly, his voice measured and deliberate, "how many people have you dismissed without ever bothering to look past the surface? How many opportunities have walked through this office only to be turned away because they didn't fit your definition of what wealth looks like?" The words cut deep, and Patricia felt them like blows she couldn't block. She glanced at her assistant for support, but the young man avoided her eyes, his respect now shifted entirely toward Marcus. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his presence commanding every inch of the space between them. "This is bigger than me," he continued. "Every time you judge by appearances, every time you humiliate someone who doesn't fit your narrow image, you stain this institution's name. And you wonder why business slips away, why people are taking their wealth elsewhere." Patricia tried to interject, her voice cracking. I assure you, Mr. Wright, this isn't how we usually conduct ourselves. But Marcus's eyes, sharp and unyielding, froze her mid-sentence. He reached into his briefcase again, pulling out the folder she had so arrogantly dismissed earlier, and this time he spread its contents across her desk with purposeful precision. Contracts, audited financial statements, acquisition agreements, all stamped, sealed, and legally binding, spilled across the polished oak surface like undeniable proof of her incompetence. This transaction, Marcus said, his tone calm but heavy with meaning, was worth $500 million. $500 million. It would have made your branch the most profitable in this entire region. It would have secured bonuses, headlines, and recognition for everyone sitting above you. Patricia's eyes darted across the papers, her chest tightening as the magnitude of her arrogance settled over her. $500 million, and she had just mocked him out of the door without so much as a glance. But now, Marcus continued, sliding the papers back into the folder with slow, deliberate movements, "This deal will not be happening here, and I will make sure the right people know exactly why." The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as Patricia felt her carefully built career collapsing brick by brick. She had spent years clawing her way into the position of branch manager, building a reputation for being shrewd and uncompromising, and yet here in the span of minutes, she had dismantled it with her own arrogance. "Please," she blurted out, her voice trembling, her professional facade finally crumbling. "Mr. Wright, let's not be hasty. We can fix this. I can personally handle your account. I'll—" Marcus shook his head, cutting her off with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command obedience. No, Miss Harding. You don't get to erase what's already been said. You don't get to treat me like I don't belong and then scramble when you realize your mistake. Actions have consequences, and I intend to make sure yours are felt. He stood to his full height, adjusting his suit jacket as if to signify the conversation was over. Patricia, pale and desperate, reached across the desk, her hands trembling, but Marcus didn't even glance at them. His eyes met hers one final time, steady and resolute. I walked in here offering you a chance to be part of something that would have elevated this branch beyond anything it's seen. Instead, you chose to reveal who you really are. And now, you will have to live with the fallout. With that, he turned and walked toward the door, his stride confident, unhurried, leaving behind an office heavy with silence and regret. Patricia sank back into her chair, her pulse racing, her heart pounding with the sick realization that she had just destroyed not only her biggest opportunity, but perhaps her entire career. The balance of power had shifted entirely, and she was no longer the gatekeeper. She was the fool who had locked the door on her own future. By the next morning, Patricia Harding's worst fears began to materialize. Right Global released a brief but devastating public statement. Effective immediately, Right Global Industries will cease all business relations with Westfield Bank due to repeated incidents of discrimination at the branch level. It was only a single paragraph long, but it landed like a bomb. Financial journalists picked it up instantly, and by noon, headlines blazed across major outlets. Right Global cuts ties with Westfield Bank, and discrimination costs Westfield $500 million. Outside the gleaming glass facade of the branch, news vans parked in rows, their cameras pointed at the revolving doors, eager to capture the faces of employees scrambling to work under the sudden spotlight. Clients called in droves, some demanding explanations, others quietly withdrawing their accounts. The branch's phone lines jammed with angry customers who wanted no part of a bank accused of humiliating one of the world's most respected CEOs. Inside Westfield's corporate headquarters, panic took root. Shareholders demanded answers, and the boardroom filled with raised voices as executives scrambled to assess the damage. The bank's stock price plummeted by 6% in a single day, an unheard of drop for such a stable institution. Patricia was summoned to the headquarters that afternoon, her pulse pounding as she entered the towering glass skyscraper. She expected a private scolding, perhaps a demotion, but what she walked into was far worse. Projected on the screen in the boardroom was Marcus's statement, alongside the assistant's written testimony confirming every humiliating word Patricia had spoken. Her attempts to explain sounded weak, her excuses flimsy in the face of irrefutable evidence. "You cost us a client who would have put this branch on the map," one executive hissed, his voice shaking with anger. Another leaned forward, eyes cold. "You didn't just lose a deal, you made us a headline for all the wrong reasons." Patricia sat frozen, her career unraveling with each word, the weight of her arrogance now collapsing on her like an avalanche. High above the city skyline, Marcus sat in his penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling windows casting golden light across polished mahogany and leather. From here, he could see the bank tower that had so arrogantly turned him away, now buzzing with reporters and panicked executives. Yet, as he sipped his coffee, Marcus felt no satisfaction in their downfall. For him, this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about exposing what too many endured in silence. He had money, influence, and the weight of a billion-dollar name behind him, tools that most people who looked like him did not have when they were told they didn't belong. That thought lingered heavier than the headlines. He remembered the countless times earlier in his career when doors had been slammed in his face, when his ideas were dismissed before a word left his mouth, when people assumed he was the assistant instead of the leader. Back then, he had no glowing ID to prove his worth, no recognition to command respect. What about the young black entrepreneur trying to secure her first loan? What about the immigrant father bringing his savings to open a small business account? They couldn't simply pull out a CEO badge and silence prejudice. Marcus leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing in resolve. This incident had pulled a hidden truth into the light. But it wasn't enough for him to walk away and let the bank's humiliation stand as the only consequence. If change was going to happen, it had to be bigger than one man's pride. Picking up his phone, he called his board members, his voice steady, commanding. "It's time," he said. "We're going to build something that ensures no one else has to beg for dignity when they walk into a bank." The idea had been brewing for years, but now, with the world watching, it was ready to ignite. 2 weeks later, the city gathered under the vaulted glass roof of the convention center, where cameras flashed and reporters crowded every aisle. At the center stage stood Marcus, no longer just a CEO of a tech empire, but now the founder of a new vision, the Liberty Trust, a financial institution designed to eliminate the very barriers he had faced. His words echoed across the room, steady and resolute. No one should be judged by the color of their skin, their accent, or the clothes they wear when they walk into a bank. Access to dignity and opportunity should not depend on someone's bias. It should be a right. The crowd erupted into applause, and among them were small business owners, students, and families who had been quietly suffocated by systems stacked against them. Outside the glass walls, news tickers flashed with updates of Patricia's downfall, her resignation forced, her reputation in ruins, lawsuits piling against the bank's executives. She had once sneered at Marcus as if he were beneath her. Yet now her name was synonymous with discrimination, while his had become a banner for change. But Marcus didn't linger on her fate. She was a symbol of the problem, not the heart of it. As he signed the first charter of the Liberty Trust, a little girl in the front row, her mother clutching her hand, asked timidly if she, too, could open a savings account for her lemonade stand. Marcus bent down, smiled, and replied, "You already have an account here. This is your bank." The hall fell into a hush before another wave of applause shook the walls, louder than any rejection he had ever endured. For Marcus, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting the rules so the next generation would never have to prove their worth just to be treated with respect. The city had witnessed a man denied his dignity, and now it watched him turn that denial into a movement.